Hey guys, and welcome. This is to serve as an overview of this reinforcement packet, Early English Settlements in North America. We're going to look at this chart in front of you. We're going to compare early English settlements in North America, specifically Jamestown and Plymouth. So if you look in that second column under Jamestown, we're going to start out discussing the location. So, traveling abroad, the Susan Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery, 104 men landed in Virginia in 1607 at a place they named Jamestown. Jamestown offered anchorage, a good defensive position, warm climate, and fertile soil. In contrast, Plymouth Rock, specifically 1620, occurred 13 years later. 102 settlers aboard the Mayflower landed in Massachusetts at a place they named Plymouth. Plymouth provided good anchorage and an excellent harbor. However, there was cold climate and thin, rocky soil, limited farm size. New Englanders turned to lumbering, shipbuilding, fishing, and trade as opposed to farming. There were also differences between Jamestown and Plymouth in the reasons for settlement. So in Jamestown, reasons for settlement included economic motives prompted by colonization in Virginia. The Virginia Company of London, organized in 1606, sponsored the colony. Organizers of the company wanted to expand English trade and obtain a wider market for English manufactured goods, and they naturally hoped for financial profit from their investment in shares of company stock. In contrast, Plymouth was about freedom from religious persecution, motivating the Pilgrims to leave England and settle in Holland. However, the Pilgrims felt that their children were being corrupted by the liberal Dutch lifestyle. News of the English colony in Virginia motivated them to leave Holland and settle in the New World. Rough seas and storms prevented the Mayflower from reaching its intended destination in the area of the Hudson River, and the ship was steered instead toward Cape Cod. Because of the change of course, the passengers were no longer within the jurisdiction of the charter granted to them in England by the Virginia Company. A third comparison is early setbacks. In Jamestown, there was a lack of experience, unwillingness to work, and the lack of wilderness survival skills led to disagreements and inaction at Jamestown. Poor Native American relations and disease compounded these problems. In contrast, in Plymouth, there was cooperation and hard work as part of the Pilgrims' lifestyle. Nevertheless, they too were plagued with hunger, disease, and environmental hazards. Now we are going to compare the two governments. In Jamestown, in 1619, the first representative legislative assembly in the New World met at the Jamestown Church. In Plymouth, since New England was outside the jurisdiction of Virginia's government, the Pilgrims established a self-governing agreement of their own, called the Mayflower Compact. Now to compare the fate of these two, Jamestown and Plymouth. Jamestown. The Powhatan Indians stopped bartering for food. Hunting became highly dangerous as Powhatan Native Americans also killed Englishmen. Long reliant on the Indians, the colony found itself with far too little food for the winter. As the food stocks ran out, the settlers ate the colony's animals, horses, dogs, and cats, and then turned to eating rats, mice, and shoe leather. In their desperation, some practiced cannibalism. Winter of 1609 to 1610 is called the Starving Time. This all occurred in Jamestown. In Plymouth, though more than half the original settlers died during that grueling first winter, the survivors were able to secure peace treaties with neighboring Native American tribes and build a largely self-sufficient economy within 5 years. Now that I've read this chart to you, please identify 10 differences between the settlements at Jamestown and Plymouth. Please feel free to refer back to these columns. The article. Starving settlers in Jamestown Colony resorted to cannibalism. The Smithsonian Magazine, Joseph Stromberg, May 1, 2013. The harsh winter of 1609 in Virginia's Jamestown Colony forced residents to do the unthinkable. A recent excavation at the historic site discovered the carcasses of dogs, cats, and horses consumed during the season commonly called the starving time. But a few other newly discovered bones in particular, though, tell a far more gruesome story: the dismemberment and cannibalization of a 14-year-old English girl. The chops to the forehead are very tentative, very incomplete, says Douglas Owsley, the Smithsonian forensic anthropologist who analyzed the bones after they were found by archaeologists from Preservation, Virginia. Then the body was turned over, and there were 4 strikes to the back of the head, one of which was the strongest and split the skull in half. A penetrating wound was then made to the left temple, probably by a single-sided knife, which was used to pry open the head and remove the brain. It's long been speculated that the harsh conditions faced by the colonists of Jamestown might have made them desperate enough to eat other humans and perhaps even commit murder to do so. The colony was founded in 1607 by 104 settlers aboard 3 ships, the Susan Constant, Discovery, and Godspeed, but only 38 survived the first 9 months of life in Jamestown, with most succumbing to starvation and disease. Some researchers speculate that drinking water poisoned by arsenic and human waste also played a role. Because of difficulties in growing crops, they arrived in the midst of one of the worst regional droughts in centuries, and many settlers were unused to hard agricultural labor. The survivors remained dependent on supplies brought by subsequent missions, as well as trade with Native Americans. By the winter of 1609, extreme drought, hostile relations with members of the local Powhatan Confederacy, and the fact that a supply ship was lost at sea put the colonists in a truly desperate position. 16 years later, in 1625, George Percy, who had been president of Jamestown during the starving time, wrote a letter describing the colonists' diet during that terrible winter. Having fed upon our horses and other beasts as long as they lasted, we were glad to make shift with vermin as dogs, cats, rats, and mice, as to eat boots, shoes, or any other leather, he wrote, and now famine beginning to look ghastly and pale in every face, that nothing was spared to maintain life and to do those things which seem incredible, as to dig up dead corpses out of the graves and to eat them. And some have licked up the blood which hath fallen from their weak fellows. Despite this and other textual references to cannibalism, though, there had never been hard physical evidence that it had occurred, until now. Owsley speculates that this particular Jamestown body belonged to a child who likely arrived in the colony during 1609 on one of the resupply ships. She was either a maidservant or the child of a gentleman, and due to the high-protein diet indicated by his team's isotope analysis of her bones, he suspects the latter. The identity of whoever consumed her is entirely unknown, and Owsley guesses there might have been multiple cannibals involved because the cut marks on her skin indicate a more skilled butcher than whoever dismembered her head. It appears that her brain, tongue, cheeks, and leg muscles were eaten, with the brain likely eaten first because it decomposes so quickly after death. There's no evidence of murder, and Owsley suspects that this was a case in which hungry colonists simply ate the one remaining food available to them despite cultural taboos. I don't think that they killed her by any stretch, he says. It's just that they were so desperate and so hard-pressed that out of necessity this is what they resorted to. Now that I've read this primary source to you, please answer the following questions. Number 1, what does the article reveal about life in Jamestown? Number 2, why are forensic anthropologists essential for studying certain aspects of the past? And for what aspects of the past are forensic anthropologists particularly important? Number 3, could any actions on the part of settlers have prevented this tragedy? Think particularly about decisions made by settlers before the tragedy. Number 4, what conditions or factors in particular led to this tragedy? Primary source, the Mayflower Compact, 1620. Agreement between the settlers at New Plymouth, 1620. In the name of God, amen. We, whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, Defender of the Faith, having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith, and the honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents solemnly and mutually, in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better order and preservation, and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof do enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinance, acts, constitutions, and officers from time to time as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. In witness whereof we have hereunto subscribed our names at Cape Cod the 11th of November, in the reign of our sovereign Lord King James, of England, France, and Ireland, the 18th, and of Scotland the 54th, Anno Domini 1620. Now that I've read the Mayflower Compact, please answer the following questions. 1. In your own words, state what the settlers at New Plymouth were establishing. 2. Why were the settlers at New Plymouth establishing this? 3. Why is the Mayflower Compact a significant advancement in the evolution of representative government? 4. How does representative government differ from other forms of government?